Right. So, good morning, Amitav, where you are.
Good morning, Janice. I suppose it's good evening. It should be good evening where you are.
Yes. But no matter, it's lovely to see you and to everyone who's joining us from Shillong. Kumno, I hope you're safe and well. And Amitav, a very warm welcome to our literary festival session. I hope one
Thank you, Janice. Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
I hope one day, Amitav, we can welcome you in person to Shillong. In fact, I was going to ask, have you ever been to this part of the world? Have you made a quick trip from Calcutta to the hills?
It's an amazing thing. No, I've never been.
Well, it's time that changed then, for sure.
Yeah, sure.
Regardless, it's lovely to have you here, and thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank
Um,
you.
so, first of all, many congratulations on the new book.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, the
Thank
Nutmeg
you.
Earth, Parables for a Planet in Crisis. And, I was most intrigued by the word parable, the inclusion of the word parable in the title, um, because, of course, parables are small, simple stories that Jesus told in the Gospels. But the word adds this moral and spiritual dimension, I thought, um, which is extremely predominant in this text. Now we're going to talk some more about the nutmeg scars a little bit later, but I just had a slightly broader question for you just now, Amitav. So, someone much wiser than me once said that we write the books that we want to read. And of course, this is because, the experiences that we have in our lives draw us towards certain places, people, themes. Um, and for the last few years, if not more, you've been actively and rigorously writing about um, our planet in crisis. And I was just wondering what your journey had been towards cultivating this kind of consciousness, whether it had been gradual, organic, whether there was a moment of sort of prompting or inspiration. I know you like to cook, for example. So, was there a point at which you were asking, where does my food come from? Who grows it? Is it locally sourced? How is it grown? Um, so, would you care to map out your journey a little bit for us?
Well, I think spending time in the Sundarban had a lot to do uh, with my sort of evolution as a writer, because certainly even way back when I first started writing about the Sundarban, it was very clear that something was not right. That something was going very wrong over there, and I think that really had the effect of waking me up to actually what's going wrong with the whole planet as such. You know, so I've been thinking about these issues really, since for the last couple of decades, I think, and as the years go by, things just get worse and worse, as I'm sure you've noticed. You know, I mean, you were just saying how bad the air has become in Delhi, so that it's literally inescapable. I mean, one just can't live there. But the terrible thing is that it's not just Delhi. Even in Goa, where the air is much clearer than in Delhi, actually there the air is not good at all. If you look at the air quality, even in a place like Goa, it's not that good. I don't know how. I'm what the air is like in Shillong. I imagine it's a lot better. But I think we are really seeing this sort of, multifaceted crisis that's sort of erupting all around us.
No, truly. Um, it is what it is, and it's happening all over, and it is inescapable. Um, Amitav, on my bookshelf, there's a book there called 50 Plants That Changed the World. And within it are many, many stories of how certain plants at certain points of time were exceedingly pivotal in shaping our human histories. And I love the book. It's beautifully sort of illustrated, but I also love it because it made me see how plants carry along with them these incredibly rich and complex social, cultural, economic biographies. And of course, so many plants have been killed for, fought for, shipping routes have been carved for them, as we know. And I'm thinking orchids and tea and tobacco, cotton. And I was just wondering, how is it that you came to the nutmeg? What was it about the nutmeg story that made you believe that it served as this powerful portal after which the rest of the book could unfurl? And for those in the audience who may not have read the book yet, the nutmeg's curse is arguing very much that colonialism and the ideologies behind the colonial project uh, play a great role in the ecological crisis that we find ourselves in today. But Amitav, why the nutmeg?
Well, the nutmeg, I suppose, I had a lot of these ideas in my head for a long time that I was thinking about. But basically, going to the Banda Islands was really what put it all together for me, because I should explain here that until the 18th century, the Banda Islands, the Banda Archipelago is this tiny group of islands in the very far east of Indonesia. It's actually very close to East Timor. But it's the only place in the world where where the nutmeg tree was found. So the nutmeg tree. Nutmegs have been traveling around the world for millenniums. I mean, they were in India. Going back well before the Common Era. They were in China. They were in Europe. So, nutmegs were hugely valued, as a spice, also for their medicinal properties and so on. But what happened is that, in the end, the nutmeg, as with other spices, uh, really drew European navigators into the Indian Ocean. And one of the first places they made for was, in fact, the Banda Archipelago. And once there, they tried to they tried to establish a monopoly on the nutmeg trade, and the Banda Islanders resisted, as anybody would, of course. So in 1621, the Dutch, who were then the dominant colonial power, took a fleet to the Banda Islands and basically eliminated all the islanders. It was, it was a horrifying genocide, really. There's no other word for it. They killed a number of the islanders. Some fled, some died of starvation in the mountains. It was a horrifying thing. So I suppose, in a sense, what happened to the Banda Islanders is that they were destroyed by the so-called resource curse. They had this miraculous tree, and the tree made them prosperous for thousands of years. But it also led to their elimination. it led to them being wiped out, more or less. And I think that's in a sense the circumstance that the whole planet is in now. You know, we have this wonderful planet, you know, this wonderful Earth, which teems with wonderful things. And yet, the way that we've treated these things is that, we've treated them like plunderers. And as a result, it seems that the entire planet is now laboring under a kind of resource curse.
Absolutely. And this is where also I think, the idea of the parable comes in as well, that this story serves as a smaller story for what's happening, to the planet itself on a much, much larger scale.
I find that a lot of people sort of hit upon the biblical overtones of the word parable. But actually, what I had in mind rather were two things. One is, of course, Octavia Butler, the great African American writer, her parables, A Parable of the Sower and A Parable of the Planter, and so on, wonderful books. The other thing that I had in mind really was the structure of the book, because the structure of this book is not linear as such. It's parabolic. So that was what I had in mind, really.
I mean, that's quite lovely, Amitav. And I'm going to ask you a question that I've sort of wanted to ask for a very long time, although, some might sort of deem it slightly juvenile or even silly, or it might be sort of one of those questions that, you're asked in a creative writing class. But I'm curious, so I'm going to ask you anyway. When you sort of come across a story or when you come across a snippet of information, what is it that allows you to decide that you wish to explore this particular story through fiction? So a novel like Gun Island or the Ibis trilogy. Or what is it that makes you decide, no, actually, this is going to be, a nonfiction text. I'm going to explore it in this way, like the Nutmeg Curse, for instance. What is it that makes you decide, and how do these spaces sort of, how are they different for you? What do they offer that's different and perhaps even similar as well?
Well, writing a novel and writing nonfiction are two very different projects. Writing a novel, writing fiction, I would say, is for me very much more difficult than writing nonfiction. Uh, it's just a lot more challenging. In this particular case, I knew I wanted to write. I wanted to write the story as a non-fictional story. I don't really know how one decides. I can't really answer that. I think one just knows, and one has to do it as best one can.
It's almost instinctive, maybe. It just feels like you're drawn towards a particular sort of way of telling, and it just happens. Because of course you've been, so prolific with both, and it's just wonderful that's the case. So as I was mentioning before our session started, I teach at a small liberal arts university just outside Delhi, and I teach these young undergraduates, very sweet, very, very worried about the fate of the planet. And they come to me, saying, we've read all of this literature and we've read all these reports, and, it's pretty dispiriting. They all read a bit like doomsday pronouncements. And honestly, why are we carrying around our little steel straws and, carrying our little cloth shopping bags when it seems like really it's too late and nothing sort of can be saved. And I think I'm going to, first of all, recommend the Nutmeg Curse to them. Not because the book doesn't include these truly devastating stories, because they're there and they really are just horrific and tragic, but because there's a certain thread that you pull through the chapters, through the book, through the parables, and one that you sort of return to quite often, which is which is which is what which is where you say that the vitality of the earth and the people who believe in that vitality have never been truly and completely annihilated. And I thought that was such a powerful and such a moving, thought. And I wondered, I wanted to know, how could we possibly strengthen this thread? What are the kind of spaces that we can carve for this vitality and the belief in this vitality to grow, to strengthen, for people to be able to sing their songs and tell their stories. I wondered if you had sort of an imagination for that.
Well, let me say, Janice, that I'm not surprised that you have these young people coming to you and asking these questions, because, of course, I mean, they're the first generation, perhaps, that's growing up with the knowledge that we are heading towards something very, very bad, and we are already seeing that all around us. And I try to be sort of optimistic on the whole, because I have children, Um, but I must say it's becoming harder and harder. I really find it increasingly difficult now to even put on any kind of air of optimism, because, you must have seen with this Glasgow summit what a complete disaster it was. I think things are actually much worse even than they seem. We have to remember that scientists, for one, they have a sort of institutional commitment to trying to, as it were, tell their story in a less frightening way than is actually warranted. So things are very, very bad, and I don't know what kind of world those young people that you're teaching are heading towards, but it certainly will not be a world like the one that I grew up in. Already, we can see that the world is catastrophically changed, you know. And as the years go by, it's almost certainly going to get worse. You are in Shillong. In fact, the mountain regions are likely to be even worse affected than other regions. We can see that terrible story already unfolding in front of us, whether it's in Garhwal or in, other parts of the Himalaya. But actually, what is really frightening is that I think on the one hand you have all these climate impacts, but in fact, the political scenarios that are coming about as a result, in one way or the other, of these impacts are even more scary. You know, I mean, around the world, wherever we look, we see a profound destabilization. Uh, and that's actually, I would say, even even scarier than what's happening in relation to environment and climate.
And they're all
So I wish I could.
hmm.
Yeah.
And they're connected, of course. I just wanted to add that as well.
Yes, they're absolutely connected. So, I try on the whole to be optimistic. I try to, have an upbeat outlook. The one thing that gives me hope is, the young people are now turning out in large numbers. Even as we saw in Glasgow, I think that was the one hopeful thing that we saw at this climate summit. So that's certainly a plus. But, at this point, it's fairly clear that Certain catastrophic impacts of the planetary crisis cannot be avoided, even if the whole world were to act, with the maximum possible speed, which it shows no signs of doing.
I still believe that writing is a hopeful act, though. So I refuse to believe that all hope is lost. Just writing, I think, is an act of hopefulness. So I'm so glad you still wrote this book, despite feeling, the way that you do. Of course, my next question was going to be, so Amitav, what gives you hope? But I feel like you might have answered that one already. um,
Well, I think is that we should take some hope from is that let's just think about this pandemic, you know, and I do think that the pandemic holds many pointers for the future, as it were. One of the good things that came out of this pandemic is that we all realized that there's a lot of stuff that we do which is meaningless, which we don't need to be doing. It's just busy work, you know. And people have begun to find a better work-life balance, as they say. People have begun, to go away from jobs they don't really need to do, meaningless jobs and so on. So I think there is that, and I think we all also discovered, that what really matters is those who are close to you, whether as friends or as family. They're, they're what one really values,
so
So
true.
all of that, I think these are the pluses. I mean, there is just so much noise in the world, just meaningless activity, meaningless noise, and I think rediscovering essential relationships and so on. That is a big plus, but how are we going to say that's a big plus to, let's say, some to a villager in the Sundarban, who's being hit by a cyclone,
Yeah.
or to someone, you know, in Mumbai or Chennai who's being hit by
Climate
some sort
refugee.
of,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, some dreadful, rain event.
yeah, yeah. Has the pandemic and this lockdown time, um, has it changed the way you approach your writing, your gathering of material of what you want to write about next? I know we talked about how there's been a pruning of some sorts, right? Cycles of consumption have broken. We've realized in some ways what's truly important to us or what should be truly important to us. And I was just wondering if that has also sort of spilled over into the writing life, if you feel as though actually, this is what I really want to be writing about, and this is what I need to be doing. Is there some sort of sense of that, Amita?
I wish we could say that cycles of consumption have been broken, but unfortunately, what we see is that that's not the case.
They're
Uh,
back.
you know, yeah, during the pandemic, there were many people who were, how shall I say, who looked on the bright side and said maybe, this could be an opening to something better in the world. But in fact, the historical experience of pandemics show that, once a pandemic passes, not that this one has passed, but once a pandemic passes, people actually double down and, on whatever they were doing, and do it even more frantically. So, for
Almost as though
example,
to make up. Hmm.
yeah, so the 1918 uh, influenza pandemic led to the roaring 20s, as they call it, to this massive speculative bubble, which eventually, bursts in 1929 with the Great Depression. And there are signs that that's actually what's happening right now. I think global greenhouse gas emissions this year are trending to be the highest ever. And all the indicators are that we are returning, in fact, to our bad old ways as quickly as possible, which is exactly what many of us feared. So yeah, yes, I wrote this book entirely during the pandemic,
Yeah.
and I think the pandemic did make it possible, to have a kind of deep focus on a single subject, on a single topic. So it was a different way of writing, for that for that period.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also wanted to know, Amitav, because I do feel that this book is different. It does stand apart a little from, from the others. Um, I wanted to know if writing the book changed you in any way, because there's a, a space for indigeneity within the book. There's a recognition of vitality as this almost sacred life force. There's also, and this is how you end the book really, there's also a call for a need, an absolute sort of imperative need to acknowledge the voices of the non-human. And I just felt as though somehow, to come to that kind of space, to think that way, um, perhaps there needs to be some sort of shift inside as well. And, there's a moment towards the end of the book where you're in the old Dutch, the old colonial Dutch, house, and it's empty, and you're in that room, and there's a strange moment. There's a strangeness that happens there, and you sort of call it the hidden force later, which I loved. But I thought it was quite a moment of vulnerability, and I just wondered if writing this book had in some way transformed you.
I wouldn't say so much transformed as made me acknowledge, certain aspects of the realities that we all live with. And yes, I do think that being in Indonesia, writing about Southeast Asia, it is it is a region where actually these hidden forces are really uh, much more powerful than elsewhere. This is certainly true of Myanmar. For all I for all I know, it's true of Shillong. That there's a very powerful sense of the unseen, as it were.
Very much.
Much
Very much.
it is it?
Yes, very much. There is, so some people call it animism, but it's not quite that. It's more a sense of, again, the vitality of landscape, of rivers, of forest, of them sort of being imbued with, uh, a life force. So it's very much there in our stories, in our songs. But of course, at the same time, while this is one of the most ecologically diverse regions in the world, there's also talk for a push for palm oil plantations. So, then you wonder, how are we having this conversation in 2021? Have we not learned anything, where the conversation should be, how do we best, um, you know, allow the ecological diversity of this area to flourish? How are we not having that conversation? How on earth are we still having, you know, conversations about monocultural palm oil plantations? I mean, it's just, the disconnect is just stark and ridiculous. But I've completely taken away sort of, your train of thought, I think. So please, back to you, Amitav.
No, I think what you're saying is absolutely right. And let's not forget that, in fact, Assam and the regions that, the Northeast, have historically been home to these terrible monocultures, like tea, you know, and tea really is as we can see now, the whole sort of plantation tea economy was just a dreadful thing. I mean, no wonder local people didn't want to work under those circumstances. So they had to go and bring in, essentially unfree labor, and that entire model is collapsing all around us. And the palm oil economies are just as bad. I don't know if you've ever been inside a palm oil plantation. I have, in Malaysia, and I can tell you, again, it recreates this kind of a sort of racial capitalism. In Malaysia, actually, uh, the workers on these plantations are, they're not actually indentured workers, but effectively they are. They are migrants,
Yeah.
whose passports are taken away, and who have to work under the most dreadful circumstances, because palm oil plantations. I mean, it's just horrible. It's all chemical dependent. So they spend their whole day, spraying chemicals everywhere. They themselves fall sick through exposure to chemicals. I mean, it's the worst possible thing that could happen, and the very fact that it's not just in the Northeast. I mean, even in Central India, they're talking about this ghastly model. So, as you say, far from changing course or changing direction or heading in a better direction, we seem to be hurtling towards catastrophe. What else can you say?
God. Yeah, there's a line in your book, I think, where you're sort of we're driving ourselves into the apocalypse, which I thought was particularly sort of resonant. But no, I mean, I think the nutmeg's curse is so incredibly resonant for our times, and it's so important. And I still think that it is a hopeful act to write this book, Amitav. I insist. And I think that for people here, in other parts of the world who may be removed geographically, and removed in terms of time, to what you speak of in the book, the anecdotes that you share, the stories that you sort of lay out for us. There are still these really important questions, I think, that we all need to ask. Really, what are the discussions that we need to be having now? How do we in some way find these connections, and learn from them, learn from what's happened? So I thought this was a really, really moving, very powerful book. So still, thank you for writing it. I feel like we may have come to the end of our time for the session. But I wanted to thank you again for spending your morning with us and starting your day talking about the end of the world.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you. It's always great to talk to you, and great to be on this festival. Thank you very much indeed for having me.
Just been a pleasure, Amitav. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.